My name is Owen Anderson, and I teach philosophy and religious studies here at ASU West. And each semester we have a number of public talks called the Philosophy Out West series. And tonight's talk is about the problem of evil. And our presenter is Greg Malloy, who teaches philosophy at Grand Canyon University. So we're inviting our competitors. Are you going to tell them about the lobes up?
Well, they already know. It's everywhere.
It could be worse. It could be either way. But here we are, going to hear about the problem of evil from Greg Malloy. And then after his presentation, I think he gave you a handout. And after his presentation, we're going to have some time for questions and discussion. I'm sure he'll like to hear your thoughts and have some philosophical exchange. Great.
All right, well, good evening. I just want to tell you a little about the structure for tonight. We are going to end, we'll try to end promptly at 7:30. I'm going to try to move through this handout to give us a significant amount of time to have discussion at the end. I'd like to give at least half an hour dedicated towards questions and answers and discussion too. So as you're listening, you have your handout there. Jot down some notes, questions, objections, challenges. I welcome all of those things. So at the end of the discussion, or after we go through the outline, I'll give you a little bit more direction as far as the question and answer time. Okay, and I do want to acknowledge before I start that the majority of this, the content of the presentation is influenced and taken from a book, Philosophical Foundation by Srenja Gangadine. So I want to be sure I give credit to that and point you to that if you want further to look into this further. All right, so we are looking tonight at the question of the problem of evil, and you notice the subtitle there is a Christian response to the most persistent objection to belief in God. So we are going to speak particularly from that perspective. I am a Christian. I'm going to address the question from that perspective. I'm not going to try to say how a Muslim or another kind of theist might respond to that objection. So I almost didn't make it here tonight because I experienced some gratuitous evil on the way over here, some gratuitous traffic that almost kept me from being here. But I'm glad I am here to talk to you about this serious and grave issue. And it's a little bit unusual for me because typically when I speak or teach, I like to use humor and stories, and this isn't really quite the subject matter to do that with. So we'll have to kind of work through it in a serious and somber way, but we want to give the subject matter the seriousness that it deserves. But I will say one thing. I was reading a book in preparation for this, a number of books, and one of the ones I looked over said it laid out different versions of the problem of evil, and like many books do and many articles, talk about the philosophical or logical problem, and then kind of a more existential problem. And I thought it was humorous, the examples that it gave, because it said the philosophical problems might be ones that come up in a philosophy or theology class. And I was like, oh, great, hey, that's me, because I teach about the problem of evil, and I teach philosophy and theology courses, and I did a whole course just on the problem of evil last year. So I said, great. And then it said, and the existential problem you might be concerned with, for example, if you had a child that had a brain tumor or something. I said, whoa, I have a child that has a brain tumor. This book was written for me. So I don't pretend that I'm the only one who needs to work through these questions, though. I think that this is a universal question, and not even really for just the theist, although we're going to be focusing on that tonight. Other worldviews address this problem too. So you can pick up a book about ethics and Buddhism and Hinduism, and you can read about the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, and the first one talking about how all is change or suffering. So it's beginning with that reality of suffering and how do we deal with that. But we're particularly going to be focused on tonight the problem of evil for theism. So there's 10 points I want to talk about. The first one is just what is the problem of evil? And we see that this question originates from basic beliefs about God, particularly God's being all powerful and all good. Now, if God wasn't all powerful or all good, then we'd have a way out of the problem of evil. We could say, well, he wants to do something about it, but he just can't. He's not all powerful. He's like Zeus or something. Or we could say, well, he's powerful enough, but he's not really all good. So he doesn't really have a desire to change things. But for historic Christianity, historic theism, that's not an option. If we affirm that God is both all good and all powerful, then we have to deal with this question of why is there evil then? Why does evil exist? Okay. So secondly, we see the 1.2, the description of the problem of evil. We could say it as this, that if God is all powerful and all good, why is there evil? That's pretty straightforward. This formulation goes all the way back to, it's usually rooted in Epicurus, although I think we could probably say that others before him wrestled with this problem. Maybe not put it in that way, but I think if you read the wisdom literature of the Christian scriptures and Ecclesiastes and the Psalms talk a lot about why do the righteous suffer, why do the wicked seem to prosper, or look at the whole book of Job. If you want a book that's wrestling with the problem of evil, you can read about that. And certainly they're dealing with this question directly too. Point 2 then is just to note the extent of the problem of evil. We say here, we make a claim that it's the widest, deepest, most persistent objection to belief in God's existence. So a couple characteristics. It's not merely widespread, like a lot of people might say it, but not very deep. It's kind of shallow and easy to dismiss. Like sometimes I hear arguments against God's existence or against Christianity, and they're just they're sort of at the level of meme theology, right? Like they're not really well thought out, but you see it on your Facebook post. You're like, oh, that's kind of catchy. I'll use that zinger on somebody, right? So that may be widespread, but not very deep. There's other things that might be deep, but not very widespread. So I'm sure somewhere there's some, philosophical work that's about, yay big, in a dusty corner of some library that's dealing with this question, but nobody's ever going to read it, and most people couldn't understand it. That's something that might be deep, but it's not very widespread. No, here we're saying that it's wide and it's deep. It's both. So you can read a lot of philosophical literature about this problem, and it's just there in popular culture. Often when I talk to people about belief in God, and I say I don't believe in God, and I like to, because I'm intrusive, I like to ask them why. I say, why don't you believe in God? And they say, well, I used to, but then this event happened, and then I stopped believing in God. Could be something from their youth, like a family member died or someone they cared about. So it comes up frequently, and it's persistent. It's not really going away. It's seeped into all aspects of our culture, including our popular literature. So there's, most famously in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, there's a significant part where he's talking about the problem of evil and why God would allow heinous things to come. If you've ever read Voltaire's Candide, this is a satirical argument against Leibniz's view that this world is the best of all possible worlds. So he's kind of mocking that view and challenging that view. Okay, so it is the widest, deepest, most persistent objection, and one that we can't ignore. So as theists, we would need to respond to this. We can't just simply say, no, it's not a big issue. But Christians have not been ignorant of this challenge. In fact, they've given responses to this. And so what we're going to do in point 3 is look at some of the challenges that have come up, some of the responses that have been given from theism to the problem of evil. But we're going to argue that none of the challenges that have been, none of the responses that have been given are sufficient responses. And we look at 3 different ones. The first is Hume's responses. Now, what this is referring to is the philosopher David Hume in his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion has a section where he's dealing with the problem of evil, and he has the characters talking about this issue. And he raises 5 possible solutions, and we're only going to deal with really the first 3 of them, and see why some of the responses have been given to those. The first one is that maybe God goodness is unknowable. So maybe what's good to God is not the same thing as what's good to us. And this might be put in popular terms when people say things like, well, God's ways are higher than our ways, after all, right? And we're finite and God's infinite, and who are we to make these kind of claims about God? But the problem with that is, if God's goodness is unknowable to us, meaning that we don't know what goodness means to God or what evil means to God, then in what sense can we still continue to have religion? How can we praise God? Because we wouldn't know what to praise him for, because we wouldn't know what is good or evil to him. And how could we even pray to him too? What would we ask him for? Because we're not sure even what to ask if we don't know what he thinks is good or evil. We might press it even further and say, if God's goodness is unknowable, then what about his other characteristics too? What about his justice or his mercy or his omnipotence or any of his characteristics? And then we might end up having to say that we can't know anything about God, which we'd be forced to give up all talk of God altogether and our belief about God, if we care about consistency. So that response doesn't seem like it's going to work. A second one is to say, well, maybe we don't know now, but we'll know in the future. And I hear this one quite frequently. If someone's going through something tough, someone might say, well, look, we don't know why God allowed this to happen, but we know that one day you'll find out about it. Won't that be a glorious day? And the idea here is that we're limited, we're finite now, but in the future we'll be able to see how God, because God sees everything. He sees all of human history working together, and that's how he can bring about his ends. And if we could only see like that, then we would have the answer to the problem too. We can't do it now, but we'll do it in the future. Okay? Now this response runs into a number of problems. One is, do we have any possible reason to think that this is going to be the case? Are we going to become like God in the future? In other words, could the finite ever become infinite in knowledge? Will you ever be able to know everything and how everything in human history all fits together perfectly? Well, you'd have to be infinite in knowledge to do that. But if the finite cannot become infinite in knowledge, in other words, if you can't become like God in his knowledge, and that's required to understand the problem of evil, then we're out of luck, because you'll never have the answer to the problem of evil. Okay? So the third response that Hume considers is that, well, maybe there's more good than evil in the world. On the whole, on the balance, there's more good than evil. And a couple objections you might even think about yourself in that is, one is, it'd be difficult to know. How would one even know if that was the situation? I think that we live in a country, in a time of human history that I'm not sure I'd ever want to exchange this. When people say, when would you like to live? If you could live any time in human history, when would you like to live? And I'd say right now. I don't want to go back at all. I don't want to go back before penicillin and before antibiotics and before dentistry, got really developed to where it is today, and medicine. I feel very blessed to be where I am right now. And I don't experience, I think, as much what we call natural evil as maybe other people have. But even living today, I'm not sure I would say that there's more good than evil. That'd be difficult to quantify or qualify. But then you run into a more even serious objection, which is, even if you did say that, let's say there's 51% good and 49% evil. The more serious objection is, if God is all good and all powerful, why is there any at all? Not just why is there more good than evil, but why is there any evil whatsoever? Why isn't it 100% and 0%? Okay? So, 3 different responses considered by Hume, and none of those seems to be sufficient to address the problem of evil. We can raise objections, serious objections to that. And as you're going through these, if you think of something, jot down a little note, because you might want to respond back and say, I don't know, I think you weren't being fair to that, and let me try to argue on behalf of that position. I encourage you to do that, because I'd like to hear that. The second, if you look at 3.2, the second response is what's called the free will defense. Now, this is certainly philosophically and maybe even at the personal level, the most common response. So when I ask Christians, why is there evil? The answer I almost always get is free will. And the way it works is something like this. Natural evil comes about from moral evil, and moral evil comes from man's free choices. And God wanted man to be free because true human dignity or true love requires man to be free in the sense that man could do something or do the opposite. Okay? So that's the free will defense. But of course, there's been objections that have been raised to this. And we have to consider those and deal with those. Although while this might be persuasive to somebody who already believes in God, if you are a theist, you have to consider objections to this and consider whether these arguments against God's existence, this particular the problem of evil, whether this is an adequate response to that. So one objection we could raise to the free will defense is that mere possibility doesn't explain the actuality of sin. So while free will may give you the possibility of sin, possibility is not the same thing as actuality. And it may be the occasion for sin. Adam and Eve may have had freedom, and the freedom explains how they could do it, but it doesn't explain why they did it. Okay? You don't have actuality always from your possibility. Like I could possibly run for president of the United States, but it's never going to happen because I see what it's like, and I don't want to do that. I have no desire to do that. So that's never going to be actualized, even though it's possible. Secondly, actuality doesn't imply necessity. Just because something is doesn't mean it has to be that way. For example, you're all here tonight, but it doesn't have to be the case that you're here tonight. You could be somewhere else. You could be home. I think it's a good night we picked because the World Series is over, and Tuesday night there's no football, and it's the only night of the week I think there's no football or something. So it's a good night to pick. But you could be here for other reasons, or you could be other places for other reasons. So just because something is doesn't mean it has to be that way. Thirdly, we can conceive of freedom that doesn't require the possibility or the actuality or the necessity of evil. There's other conceptions of human freedom that don't allow for the don't require the possibility or actuality or necessity of moral evil. For example, we could say that God is free. And if God can't do otherwise, if God can't be evil, then freedom doesn't require the ability, the possibility of evil. Humans also in the future are said to be free in a glorified state, right? Not possible to sin anymore, but yet they're still free. So the free will proponent here is going to run into kind of a conundrum because they're going to say if libertarian, this kind of freedom, what's called libertarian freedom, we have the ability to do the opposite. If this is required for true human dignity or love, then they're either going to have to say God is not free, or humans in the future who can't sin are not free, or they're going to have to change their view of what freedom means. But if they say no, humans, but if they say, well, yeah, humans in the future aren't free, then we can just press them for consistency and say, well, if you said that that's required for true human dignity then it can't be the case that we ever don't have that, right? Or if true love requires the ability to not love, okay? So 3 problems initially, that the possibility is not actuality, actuality doesn't apply necessity, and freedom doesn't require a possibility, actuality, or necessity. A third possible option is that maybe we just don't know. Maybe this is an unknown. And Hume in his dialogues suggests this. Maybe he says, perhaps the answer is just unknowable. But what I want to do in the rest of the discussion here in points 4 through 10 is see if this is the case. Is it the case that we can't know? Or possibly if we apply critical thinking at the basic level and basic concepts, maybe we can understand why God would allow moral and natural evil. Secondly, I think there might be a problem with this given the nature of creation as revelation. If God is revealing himself, the idea that this would be something that we don't know or can't know might be problematic. So let's get to the end of the discussion tonight and see if we can maybe do better than simply saying that evil is an unknown. Okay. All right, so we're going to begin at point 4 now. So basically in point 4 through 10, we're laying out an alternative response to the problem of evil. And in points 4 through 6, we're going to address basic concepts and see if by understanding the basic concepts of goodness, moral evil, and natural evil, a solution to the problem of evil begins to materialize. Okay, so this is a process called rational presuppositionalism, where we get at the more basic questions. And if we answer those things, then we'll be in a position to answer less basic questions. All right? So if you look at point 4, we begin with this question, what is the good? And we say that the good for a being is according to the nature of that being. So this is a first principle we ask you to consider. Is it the case that what's good for something is according to its nature? Or you think about what's the alternative? That what's good for something is not according to its nature? Say no. If you want to know what's good for something, say you buy a new dog or something, you buy a little beagle, like we have a beagle, and we bought him, and we bought all sorts of beagle books, right? Because beagles are different than other dogs, and you don't get a book about German shepherds to know how to deal with a beagle, and nor do you get a book about horses to know how to deal with a dog, right? Dog nature is one thing, and horse nature is something else. So if I want to know what's good for a dog, I'm going to have to understand the nature of dogs. Same with cars. You treat a car differently than you treat a person, right? So this principle that if what's good for a being is according to the nature of that being is true, then we can ask the next logical question, which is, what's the nature of humans then? If we want to know what's good for us, we got to know our nature. So 4.2 says that the good for man as a rational being is to use reason fully. So can we agree that humans are thinking beings? Do all humans think? Have you ever met a non-thinking human? You say, yeah, all the time, right? My roommate, no, right? You might not agree with their thoughts, but that's not the same thing as they're not thinking, right? In fact, it's the very thoughts they have that you disagree with, right? So all humans think by nature, and this is a basic aspect to what it means to be a human. It's basic to all their aspects of our personality. So if that's the essential part of human nature, then what's good for us is going to be affirming that nature to its fullest. In other words, using reason to its fullest. Okay? And you say, okay, well, I'm following you, but what does that mean then? How do I use reason? I said, whoa, I'm glad you asked. 4.3, reason is used to grasp the nature of things. Right? And using the law of identity and non-contradiction, excluded middle, we come to know the nature of things like humans, dogs, God, right? We can make distinctions between those things. And so this is what reason does. Reason allows us to form concepts. And then we put those concepts together with various judgments, then we put judgments together and get arguments. And those are all the forms of human thought. Okay? So if reason is used to grasp the nature of things, then we move on to 4, which says that the nature of the creation reveals the creator. So if God is creator, and we're assuming that, this is a discussion, a problem for theism, so we're assuming God creator. If God has created all that exists, and we come to know the nature of those things, then in doing so we're coming to know God, because he reveals himself through his creation. He couldn't not reveal himself through the creation. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So if point 4, the nature of the creation reveals the creator, then we put all these things together in point 5, that the good for man is the knowledge of God. Okay? So if what's good for us is according to our nature, and our nature is essentially rational, and by reason we grasp the nature of things, and those things reveal the nature of God, then we put those things together and say the good for man then is the knowledge of God. That would be what we would seek after. Okay? And again, if you have questions about any of these points, I encourage you to write them down. We'll try to address them. I know I'm going through them somewhat quickly, and that's only because I know myself and I tend to go long, and so I'm trying to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. Someone just nodded their head and made me feel bad about myself. Just kidding. All right. All right, point 5 then. So if we know what the good is, and we can say the good is the knowledge of God, now we're in a position to ask, what is moral evil then? And first point here is that moral evil is an act contrary to man's nature as a rational being. And this is really just the flip side of what is the good for us, right? If you want to know what's good for us, that would be living according to our nature. So what would be bad for you then? Well, just going against that nature, right? Just simply the opposite of that. So it would be acting contrary to man's nature as a rational being. So every time you reject your rational nature, every time you don't use reason the way you should, you're going against yourself. You're harming yourself. You're doing what's not good for you. Okay? And we can be more explicit here in 5.2 and say that it's to neglect, avoid, resist, and deny reason. There's different levels of this. You don't just usually begin with outright denying reason, but you might begin by, at first, just kind of neglecting it, not using it the way you should. It might be kind of just lazy. I'm guilty of this all the time, right? I say, should I think critically, or should I just stuff my face with Doritos and mindlessly walk around Disneyland? Because you know that's where Doritos are from. They were made at Disneyland. A lot of people don't know that, right? It's like, that makes sense, right? The happiest place on earth creates the most delightful food known to man, Doritos. I'm thinking about this right now, particularly because my wife is, as we speak, she's in Disney World. And so here I am talking about the problem of evil, and she's in the happiest place on earth. It's a nice dichotomy, right? So we first begin to just neglect and not use reason. We seek other things that we think are good for us, right? And secondly, we might then avoid it. We might avoid the use of reason, particularly if reason is, there's consequences of reason, or excuse me, if there's consequences of not using reason, and we're experiencing those consequences, and we don't want to acknowledge our lack of use of reason, we may, try to avoid it by not thinking about it. Or maybe we try to, deceive ourselves and make it like it's not so bad, right? I do this all the time, right? If I might not think the way I should or see something clearly, and I might try to excuse myself by saying, well, it's not that bad, or I'm tired, or I'm stressed, or make up all sorts of excuses. But then we can do this so long until someone might call us out on it. And you might have someone come up to you and say, hey, what are you doing here? What are you thinking? It could just be through a question. You could have someone come up to you and just ask you a question about something you believe. And maybe you've never really thought about it before. And maybe you're being exposed in a certain way, and you might try to then defend yourself. And so you resist reason, right? Or you might accuse the other person of doing something nefarious, like using philosophy tricks on you, right? Philosophers get accused of that all the time, right? You're using Jedi mind tricks on me. I don't know how to talk to you, right? Or people say, you're confusing me. To which I always respond, no, you were confused when we started, right? You're just seeing now that you're confused, right? So that's a different kind of thing there. So they might resist it, and finally, ultimately, they could just deny it, right? So if reason is showing you something and you don't like it, you could end up ultimately just saying, well, I'm just not going to go there then. So much the worse for reason, right? And it's always a possibility. You can always do that. You're free to just not use reason and reject it. But going back to the first point about what is good for us, you have to acknowledge at that point that you're going against your nature. You're choosing to not be human, essentially. Right? You want to be something other than human. And it's okay, you can choose to do that. I heard about some guys recently that tried to do that. A guy and his son tried to live with, was it like goats or something? Did you guys hear about this? Some guys in England that tried to live with goats. I don't think they lasted very long. It was a couple days. And the thing they lamented about afterwards was that like the goats didn't accept them into their society. I said, yeah, because the goats know better, right? All right. So point 3, the consequence of moral evil is spiritual death, here defined as meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. So we can, by just knowing the nature of what moral evil is, we can see what the consequences of denying that would be, right? So what is it to deny what's clear? Well, if you don't see what's clear, if you don't use reason to grasp the nature of things, what are you going to be? You're going to be confused, right? Nothing's going to make sense. The pieces of the puzzle aren't going to fit together, right? Everything's going to be meaningless. That's what it means to not use reason to see what's clear. It will result inherently it'll result in meaninglessness, right? It has to. But then, since you are a rational being and you do require meaning, and you're still going to seek after things, you're going to end up seeking things inappropriately. Instead of seeking the knowledge of God as the good, as we saw in 4.5, you're going to seek something else, like maybe another person as the good, so you can live for a relationship, or pleasure as the good, until you get tired of that pleasure and you realize it doesn't satisfy me, I have to move on to something else. And when you keep moving from one thing to another because it doesn't satisfy you, that's called boredom, right? When nothing satisfies, it's like my children, when they're just kind of hanging out during the day and they say, Dad, I'm so bored, right? Meaning that there's nothing satisfying. I need something satisfying to do, right? So when nothing seems meaningful or worth doing, that's what we call boredom, right? So meaninglessness then inherently leads to boredom. And connected up with that is guilt too. That if we were created in a certain way to know God, and we've violated that, and we've not known Him the way we should, and we've gone against our conscience, then we're going to experience inherent guilt with that. Romans 2 talks about this, talks about man's conscience alternately accusing and defending him, right? So we'll say that the consequence of moral evil is spiritual death, identified as meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. So the third concept we need to talk about is then what is natural evil. So we've got what is the good, what is moral evil, and now we talk about what is natural evil. So first point, natural evil is suffering from circumstances outside of one's own moral choices. So it's not a direct result of your not using reason, your moral evil. It's something that happens to you outside of that. Like someone sideswipes your car. That wasn't because you had an evil thought or something like that, right? Or you don't get cancer because you're not a perfectly kind individual. Right? Those things aren't rationally connected. So it could be something that's outside of your own moral choices. And in point 2, we specified a little bit more that individually you can see it in terms of toil, strife, old age, sickness, and death. Right? So we have to do a lot of toil just to survive, right? Particularly in the desert. Do you ever worry about what happened if an EMP went off over Arizona? You realize all of a sudden that we live in a desert, right? It might not dawn on you that we're in a desert, barren wasteland until that happened. And then you'd be like, oh no, all the water's gone from the store. What do I do? I'll go to the sink. Oh, the sink's not working. Then you see people out sucking on cacti or something, like trying to remember something from some wilderness training video they saw. So there's a lot of toil just to live day to day. There's also strife. People fighting, disputing with each other. And even if you don't experience those things, you're certainly going to experience old age, sickness, and death, right? And natural evil in all various kinds. I know, especially this last year, as I turned 40, I'm experiencing this in a new way. It's like a new level of natural evil. And I told my wife the other day, I was getting my hair cut, and the stylist said, your bald spot's getting bigger. And then she didn't just feel the need to tell me that. She kept pressing it, like showing me, see, look, see, here it was here, and now it's here. And I was like, what are you doing to me? Just cut my hair. I don't want to walk out of here feeling worse about myself. So, but it's true. I couldn't deny it, right? I couldn't object, right? So I feel myself getting older, getting more tired. I can't stay up late like I used to. And of course, eventually we all have to deal with the reality of death. It's coming. It could come at any time. So this is something that we all have to wrestle with. And these are the what we identify as moral evil. But also it gets expanded on a corporate level. It's not just toil, strife, old age, sickness, and death, but it can increase to war, famine, and plague. Right? So it's one thing if just a few of us are going hungry. It's another thing if masses of people are going hungry. Or it's one thing if you get sick. It's another thing if millions of people die from Spanish flu or something like that, right? So we want to say, though, in point 6.3, that this is not original in the creation, however. So sometimes if I ask students, why do we die? And they just say, well, it's just a natural part of life. And I say, but is it? Is it a natural part, or is it a very unnatural part? Especially if God exists. If God exists, wouldn't that be a rather unnatural thing? Like you wouldn't expect to die, would you? Wouldn't you expect that you'd live forever? And the fact that you die might be kind of strange. You might wonder about that, why you die. Or if I ask someone why we die, they might give me an explanation of how we die. They say, well, the body degenerates and stuff. I say, no, I know how we die. Or at least one way how we die, but I want to know why we die. Why does the body degenerate like that? Especially if God exists and he's all good and all powerful. So here we can give an argument, and you see in parentheses, it's just abbreviated could, would, must, did. And the full version of that is that if God is all powerful, then he could make a world without natural evil. He could make a world that we don't get sick and die, and we don't get old. We might get older without getting old. That's possible. And if he's all good, then he would make a world without natural evil. He would want to have the world be that way. And if someone could and they would, then they must. That's what follows from that. And if God must, then he did. He did create a world without natural evil. And certainly from the Christian perspective, this would be consistent with Genesis 1 and 2, that the original creation was good, right? Not just good, but very good. Okay? So natural evil is not original in the creation then. So 6.4, it's also not inherent in moral evil or punishment for moral evil. There's no inherent connection between moral evil and natural evil. And this is maybe another objection you could go back to the free will defense. Sometimes I bring up there, which is even if the free will defense works, how does that explain natural evil? How does that come in? You still have to have an explanation for that, not just moral evil. Okay? Because there's no apparent immediate connection there. And it's also maybe connected up with the second point, is that it's not punishment for moral evil. Because usually if I press people and they say, why is there natural evil? They say, well, maybe it's like, some kind of, it's because of this. And I say, well, do you mean it's punishment? They say, well, yeah, it's punishment. And I say, but is that consistent with what we've already seen about the consequences of moral evil? The consequence of moral evil was meaningless boredom and guilt. So how does cancer and death connect up with that? Or particularly if you're a Christian theist wrestling with this, I say, well, if physical death is punishment for sin, then how come everyone is resurrected? Wouldn't it only be the righteous or those who are forgiven who are resurrected? But if everyone's resurrected, then that can't be the punishment for moral evil. So you run into some problems there if you say it's punishment. All right, 6.5, lastly then, natural evil is imposed by God then in response to moral evil. So if it's not inherent in moral evil, and it's not punishment, and it's not original, the only thing we're left with is God brings it into the creation for some purpose. We haven't identified what that purpose is yet. That's what we're going to talk about in point 8, why there is natural evil. But at this point, at least we can say it's not original, and it's not inherent in moral evil or punishment for moral evil. Okay? All right. So moving on to point 7. And by the way, I'm perfect. You probably don't care about this. Well, maybe you do, but I care about it. I'm perfectly staying on time. Isn't that great? I have my notes on the side. It says what time I should be starting each point at. And it says point 7, 6:40. Look at my clock, 6:40. That's pretty impressive, would you say? No, all right, don't worry about that. All right. For me, it's impressive. To myself. So point 7, why is there moral evil? Well, we begin with this idea that creation is revelation, and that it is revelation necessarily, intentionally, and exclusively. So we say that creation is revelation necessarily. What this means is that a being, when it acts, necessarily reveals itself. So when I act, when I dress a certain way, or when I do certain things, I reveal things about myself, and it couldn't be otherwise. I know certain things about you just because you're here tonight. I can look at you, I can glean things about you and what you believe based on what you want to do, what you do with your time, on your actions, okay? So when you act, you reveal yourself. There's no way to act and not reveal yourself. Secondly, it's intentionally revelatory. God doesn't create accidentally, right? He doesn't say, oops, I made a universe. Oh, I guess I revealed myself. Now what do I do, right? So he acts with perfect intention and will. So if the creation reveals him necessarily, then that means he intended to reveal himself. And then lastly, it's exclusively. That there's no other way to know a being apart from its acts. So I might say, would you know me if you just stared at me? So get to know me, just look at me. See, well, you might know a very minimal amount, right? But you wouldn't really get to know me just by looking at me. How would you get to know me? Well, by, observing my life, seeing what I do, seeing how I am with my kids and my wife, and seeing the choices I make and the things that I say and things that I believe. That's where you'd get to know me, right? So that's why we say that creation is revelation necessarily, intentionally, and exclusively. Point 2, moral evil then objectively deepens and subjectively obscures the revelation. So how is it that moral evil objectively deepens the revelation? Well, it does so because it particularly deepens the revelation of God's justice and mercy. So if the inherent consequence of moral evil is spiritual death, and it comes immediately upon someone committing an act of moral evil. It's not something that happens in the future. It's immediate, and it's always present. We might use the term ontological. Then those who are in moral evil and experiencing the consequences of that, that's revealing God's justice in a certain way. That there's nothing that happens in the universe that people get away with. Nobody gets away with anything. God's justice is perfect. It's built into the nature of things. And that's going to reveal a perfection of God in a way that otherwise wouldn't, right? But it's not just those who are experiencing spiritual death. It's those who would receive God's mercy. Because if you don't deserve mercy, yet you get it, particularly if you have a great deal of moral evil, yet God forgives you of that and redeems you from that, that's going to reveal God's mercy in a way that wouldn't otherwise do it. Like if I owe you $1 and you forgive me of that, I'd say, okay, well, thanks. It's not that big of a deal though, right? But if I owe you $50 and you say, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I got it. That's a little bit, wow, that's really generous of you, right? That's surprising. If I owe you $1 million and you say, don't worry about it. You couldn't pay me back even if you tried, so don't worry about it. I forgive you that debt. That's going to reveal something about this person even more so, right? That the debt owed is so great, they're still willing to forgive you of it. So that's why we say it objectively deepens the revelation of God, the knowledge of God. But also it serves to subjectively obscure it. It obscures the revelation to the person who's not seeing it. So in moral evil, in spiritual death, we might not see the way we should, and therefore we might, the revelation, the clarity of these things might be obscured to us. And that's going to be important when we get down to the final solution, what we call the ironic solution. All right, so 7.3, that moral evil then is going to be removed gradually. If it was removed too abruptly, that revelation wouldn't be deepened, right? If there was like one day of moral evil and that was it, boom, and God takes it away, that's not deepening the revelation, right? But if God didn't remove it at all, the revelation would not be seen. How is it that, what is the purpose of moral evil? What is it revealing about God? So the solution then, if it can't be removed abruptly or not removed at all, the only solution is that it would be removed gradually over time. And that's what we see in 7.4, that there's a spiritual war, and it would be age-long and agonizing, where good would eventually overcome evil, and the earth would be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. So you'd see evil work itself out in all manner and ways through the course of human history, and you would see the inherent connection between moral evil, or sometimes a biblical term, sin and death. So sin and death, or moral evil and spiritual death. Okay? And that would reveal God's justice and mercy more. All right, so we can say then, now we've said why there's moral evil. The question is, why is there natural evil? So you say, maybe, okay, I can understand that reveals God, but why hurricanes and cancer and things like that? Well, remember, we've already said that it's not inherent in moral evil, nor is it punishment, but it's not original in the creation. So the only possible response then is that if God has brought natural evil into the world in response to moral evil, but it's not punishment, then it must be a call back out of moral evil. In that sense, it's a mercy. So we said 8.1, natural evil is a call back from moral evil. It's a call to stop and think. And I think if you think about it in life, that this is often the way it happens. Not always, but often when people kind of go through their life and they're not really thinking too much about, significant questions. Maybe they're just more concerned about, their paycheck and, who their favorite, sports team is playing that night, and kind of going through life in that kind of way. But then they maybe get a cancer diagnosis from their doctor. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa. And it kind of sharpens their focus in a certain way. That seems to be what happens a lot. So natural evil is a callback, is a call to stop and think about moral evil. In point 2, it's a silent, constant, inescapable, universal, and final call to stop and think. And you can think about each one of those attributes and say whether you think that's true, right? It's constant, it's inescapable, right? You've heard of the statement that the two certainties are death and taxes, right? And so it's something that's so universal that we kind of want to put it out of our minds. We kind of make it a joke and not want to even think about it, right? Because we just don't want to really, someone that brings up the concept of death, you're kind of thought of as sort of a morose person, right? Like, why are you always bringing up death? Why are you always talking about that? And I'm always kind of like, I don't know, I can't help it. I always want to talk about that. I always want to think about that, right? And Jonathan Edwards, American theologian and philosopher, had a list of resolutions that he wrote when I think he was 27 years old. And a number of them had to do with death. And one of them, I can't remember it verbatim, but it said something along the lines of as much as I can, think about the circumstances that are going to attend my own death. Right? So this guy's one of his goals in life was to think about his death as much as possible. You're like, that sounds weird. Like, what a weirdo. No, he had the right idea in mind, though. Right? Think about the end in mind and what's coming, and you work backwards. So you adjust your life with the end goal in mind. Not that death is the end goal, but that it's coming. And there's a certain finality of that as far as what you're able to do in this life. So it's a final call to stop and think. And then we add to that, the natural evil then would be removed when the callback ends. So you'd expect that once the callback of moral evil is finished, that natural evil would be done. It's served its purpose. It wasn't always in existence. It's serving a purpose, but it won't always be in existence in the future. Okay. And then finally, point 8.4, natural evil as a callback is mercy. And as a mercy, it requires special revelation then to show how God is going to be both just and merciful to man in sin. So if God is being merciful to us, and he's merciful and just, it begs the question, how is this going to be? What's he doing? He's calling us back out of moral evil, but how is he doing that? How is he going to accomplish these things? Okay, so that's going to leave us to expect more revelation, something to come that's going to answer this question. So finally, in point 9 here, the biblical view of sin and death. So here, what I'm trying to show is that what we've been saying in points 6, 7, and 8 is consistent. We've been saying these things from general revelation. What we're saying here is that these things are consistent with what we see in special revelation, in the scriptures, the Christian scriptures. So we've got 6 points here that show this. First, that the wages of sin is death. Right? Genesis 2:17, you have God saying that in the day you eat of it, you will surely die. Right? And of course, Adam and Eve, when they ate of the fruit, they didn't die that day, did they? So no, they didn't die physically at least. So you can say if they didn't die physically, then either God's a liar or they died some other way. And if we say no, God cannot lie, then we must say, well, they must have died another way, and if it wasn't physical, then it must have been spiritual. So the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23 talks about that. But also we can see in the scriptures that there's 2 different kinds of death, 9.2. And I won't go through all these scriptures, but if you look them up, you see that the Bible talks about various death and life in various ways. It talks about physical death and physical life, and spiritual death and spiritual life. And you have to keep those things distinct or you're going to get confused. So if Jesus tells someone that they're dead in their trespasses and sins, he's not at a graveyard, like talking to dead bodies. You're dead, right? He's talking to live humans. So what kind of death is he obviously talking about then? Has to obviously be spiritual death, right? So this shouldn't be a strange idea that there's 2 kinds of death. And 9.3, that the wages of sin is spiritual death, not physical. So you get this as you go through these different texts. You can see that, like we talked about it in Genesis, the wages of sin was obviously spiritual death. And from general revelation, we see the consequence of moral evil is spiritual death, right? Not natural evil. 4, that divine justice is ontological. It's built into the creation. No one escapes it. Point 9.5, that there's no essential difference between spiritual death in this life and in the next. Meaning that if you are in spiritual death now, it's the same kind of spiritual death you'll experience in the future. It's not that you experience spiritual death at some point in the future. It might change, it can change in degree, but not change in kind. Okay? And lastly, spiritual death for man is meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. And we see here, connected with that, certain metaphors that have been used in the scriptures, like its meaninglessness. And the scriptures talk about a darkening of the mind, right? Or boredom, a burning of desire. Right? Think about when you're bored, nothing satiates, nothing satisfies you. You say I have a burning desire, something that won't go away. Right? Or guilt, right? The torment of conscience. And the scriptures talk about a worm that doesn't die. And sometimes people go kind of literalist with this. And if you go that way, you might get some kind of strange picture of what, the punishment for sin is. Like somehow it's people who are on fire and they're in darkness and they're alone and they've got worms on them. And you say, can you have all those things? Are all those things consistent? Can you have fire and be in darkness? And you say, well, no, it's a special kind of fire that doesn't give off light. Right? And you say, why talk about fire then? Why, there's other things that burn that don't give off light, right? And we finally say that this is something that can go without end, right? You can have more meaninglessness increasing forever and ever. And the scriptures talk about spiritual death as being a bottomless pit. It's like an abyss, right? So what we've seen in these last points, starting in point 4, what is the good, what is moral evil and natural evil, and then why there's moral and natural evil. We finally get to a place here in point 10 where we can form a solution to the problem of evil. And we call it the ironic solution. And here's why. We say that man as a rational being in sin rejects the life of the light of reason. His understanding becomes darkened. His thinking becomes increasingly meaningless and futile. He claims to know when he does not know. Because he has shut his eyes, he cannot see. And that's going to be the ironic part of it. It's something that you should expect, but you didn't expect because of the very existence of moral evil in you. So we say the ironic solution is clear. The problem isn't resolved. Rather, ironically, it's dissolved. So we have here kind of what's called a reductio ad absurdum argument. So given what we've said up to this point, then we can see how the problem of evil is resolved. And we can resolve it in 5 points. So this is the person who's raising this objection, the problem of evil. Because of all the evil in the world, I cannot see how God is all good and all powerful. Right? That goes all the way back to the beginning. That was the statement of the problem of evil. If God is all good and all powerful, I can't understand that because of all the evil in the world. But based on what we've said here, and the understanding of what evil is, we can transform the statement to point 2, because of all the unbelief in the world, I cannot see how God is all good and all powerful. If evil, moral evil at its root is not using reason to see what's clear, it would be unbelief. So then point 3, because of all the unbelief in me, I cannot see how God is all good and all powerful. Unless someone wants to try to excuse themselves from this and say that, no, I see perfectly clear and I use reason perfectly. I've never met a person like this who says that they don't sin, right? Or they've done wrong. They might have different conceptions of what right or wrong mean, but I've never met someone who said that they've never done anything wrong. So, but if evil is unbelief, then we have to acknowledge that there's unbelief in me. So that's point 3. So point 4 spells this out even more. Because I've neglected and avoided the use of reason, I cannot see how God is all good and all powerful. So this is what unbelief really is. It's not using reason, avoiding it, resisting it, potentially denying it. Okay? So now how this metaphorically is stated at the end here in point 5 is, because I have shut my eyes, I cannot see what is clear about God. Metaphorically, you've closed your eyes. You've decided, I don't want to know what is clear. I don't want to seek. I don't want to use reason. In other words, I don't want to be a human being. I want to be something different. And to that, all we can say is, yes, but what would you expect? If you shut your eyes, you're not going to see what is clear about God. Okay? All right, so we made it through, and we made it through under time, 2 minutes to spare, 2 extra minutes for questions. Yes, I know that's appreciated. All right, so what I'd like to do is take the remaining time for questions and answers. It could be statements, and then if you'd just like me to respond to something, but I'm going to make some, I guess maybe some guidelines. One is that you've kind of formulated your question or your comment sort of succinctly, so I don't want to have to cut you off, so try to state it in as briefly as possible, no more than a minute. Secondly, if you have follow-up questions, I may ask you to hold on them until we can come back to you. If others have questions, I want to be sure that we've addressed everyone's questions or comments, and we can work backward. If nobody has questions, it's just you and you're the only one that has a question, then we can just dialogue for the next 30 minutes. That's fine. And lastly, if I think that the question might go too far off of the primary topic, I may table it for the moment to see if there's a more immediately relevant question. And then and then obviously if time allows, we'll come back to that one too, okay? So I'll dictatorially determine what questions are meaningful to talk about.
One thing I meant to mention is, do you mind if people want to contact you outside of this topic?
Yeah, definitely.
On a handout, if anyone was interested, they could write down your email address.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make myself, I'll hang out afterwards, and also too, if you wanted to follow up, many of you as students have my email, and if you don't, the best email is just my personal email, which is gwmalloy@hotmail.com. So there is still Hotmail, yeah. At least it wasn't AOL, right? That would have been really bad, right? I see no reason to change. I see no reason to get hip. Right? So yeah, it's just gwmalloy@hotmail.com if you'd like to talk further about this. Also, too, I know many of you came from the invitation of friends or maybe other instructors, and I would just encourage you that I'm not like a lone voice saying these things, that others hold to this position too, and would be, I'm sure, willing to talk to you about it and happy to talk to you about it. So, okay. All right, so I'll open up the floor for questions. Or
just want to clarify something here. In number 7, creation's revelation necessarily, intentionally, and exclusively. But then at the bottom we say that it requires special revelation.
right.
So exclusively, you mentioned that it is revelation of God from the things that He has made.
Right.
And you gave an example of yourself.
Right.
We don't just know who you are by looking at you. We have to know by your actions and so forth. But we also would include what you say.
Right. Yeah, so we would actually include providence as part of this too. So not just God's creating of the world, but then what He does with it, any prevenience He gives over it. And so the giving of scriptures would be part of that providence. So there would be special revelation, but that would be a further act of God. That would be Him revealing Himself in a certain way. We wouldn't know it if He had not done that. So yeah. So you're bringing up the idea that it's not just, because I mentioned special revelation, which might be more than, let's say, just bare creation. So we'd say it's not just creation as in like the beginning, like God created the heavens and the earth and all that exists, but it'd be then Him forming and filling the creation. All that He does in providence over the creation too would reveal Him. And the scripture would be a part of that too.
And we didn't get the scriptures, at least in the form we have them now. After thousands of years, people didn't have that to know God.
Right. And they didn't have, might not have special revelation, but they would have general revelation. Yeah. Good. What else? Sure.
You mentioned earlier that spiritual death pervades throughout this life. It was towards the bottom. There's a possibility for redemption from spiritual death throughout this life. What would change that after death? If spiritual death continues, why couldn't I be spiritually saved after death?
Well, I think that's what we talk about under point 8.2, that the natural evil then would be removed when the call back ends. So if you weren't being called back out of it, then you wouldn't ever respond to it. So the view I'm affirming here is that apart from God's merciful act to call you out of spiritual death, you would remain in that forever. And that there wouldn't be anything particularly that would change about that upon physical death. Like sometimes people want to say, well, won't everybody believe when they die? Won't they just see God and believe? And I say, I'm not sure why we would think that, because one, that kind of assumes that God's existence isn't clear now, but then it will be clear and therefore they'll respond to it. So, and I would argue against that. I know that God's existence is clear now and they're rejecting that. So I'd have no reason to think that they wouldn't reject it in the future, even if they got some manifestation of God's presence. And secondly, we have an example of beings who do stand in the presence of God and yet reject him. Satan and the demons, right? So they see God, but presumably they don't worship him. They may have to bow before him, but that's not the same thing as actual adoration, right? If the United States is conquered by some foreign power, we may all be forced to bow before them. That doesn't mean we agree to it or say, yes, they're worthy of worship. We'll just be plotting our time to take over, right? Did that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I see in 8.1 you say that natural evil is a callback from moral evil. And in the talk you kind of said that callback was more like attention grabbing. Is that right to characterize it like that?
Yeah, you know what? I feel like too, now that you say that, I feel like I skipped a step. I did skip a step, didn't I? I skipped 8.3. Oh, you guys looked out. You didn't call me out on it. You just wanted to get out earlier and you didn't let me know.
Those are the 2 minutes you're missing.
That was the 2 minutes. That was it. See, I timed it perfectly. Thank you. Natural evil has a threefold function. The second one we might be identifying, it recalls us from moral evil. It's a call to stop and think. But it doesn't just do that. It also restrains our moral evil in a certain way. Like the fact that we only live for 75, 80 years restrains us from being as evil as we could. I mean, imagine if people lived 1,000 years and we had these really, difficult bodies to kill, and we didn't need to sleep at all, and there wasn't any winter to stop our wars sometimes, and we lived in really close proximity. I mean, we would just be, maiming and killing each other all the time. But it'd be like this kind of never-ending battle. It's like when Decepticons fight what are the good guys? The Autobots. The Autobots. It's just like an hour-long fight. Nobody seems to be doing damage to anybody else. It'd be like that. So natural evil even restrains us from being as wicked as we could be, and then also it removes moral evil. Even in those who experience spiritual life, sin remains in them, to use biblical terms, and that natural evil serves to even, we might use the term sanctify them, continue to get them to stop and think about moral evil.
Just to follow up with that. I can see how that may apply to an adult, like in what your example with the hair or something like that.
Why'd you have to use that example?
Yeah.
Of all things,
That's really not even really
you
natural.
picked that one.
But I don't see how that would apply to an infant or something. Those kinds of cases where animals, where they don't have the faculties to even grasp the thing that we're talking about.
Right. Well, the assumption might be that the natural evil experience has to be for that person. It doesn't necessarily have to be that case. The child who has the baby who has the brain tumor, it's not a callback for that baby, right? But natural evil is a callback for all humans. So we don't want to make a one-to-one correspondence with natural evil and moral evil. Like every natural evil you experience is because there's some moral evil that's in your life. That was the problem. That was what Job's accusers in the book of Job were saying. They're saying, look, you're going through this, therefore there must be some hidden sin in your life. There must be something going on. And I was to mistake and make this kind of one-to-one correspondence. So when I stub my toe, I don't have to like, oh, wait a minute, what sin did I just do that made me just stub my toe just now? So it's a callback, it's a corporate callback for all persons. So it doesn't have to be for that individual.
Do you mind if I follow up?
Sure.
So I grant that point, but then still with animal cases and, like Fawn in the Forest with William Ropes, I'm sure you know about that.
Yeah.
Like those kinds of cases where they go unrecognized, where like intense animal suffering in the forest goes unrecognized, that could be removed and all the callback and everything could be exactly the same. It seems like a gratuitous amount of suffering and it's unrecognized, which then means that we're not going to be learning from it anyway.
Yeah, I think it's different in kind, but I don't think it's really different in, or should maybe I say it's different in variety, but I think the answer is basically the same in kind, that it doesn't have to be that we know of every particular act of natural evil that happens in order for it to be, because if we affirm that God works through secondary causes, he doesn't like every individual instance of natural evil that happens, isn't God specially acting on the world. He's not like Zeus like killing a person and then everyone looks at this situation and tries to learn from it. Because God works through secondary means, which could be, and not just doesn't have to be through moral agents, could be through gravity, right? God works through gravity. He's created the world that it works in a certain way. I could imagine that results in certain natural evils that potentially don't get seen or identified, but that wouldn't take away from the overall point of the purpose of them. So you might again still wonder why any individual act happens, but that's kind of a different question than why in general does moral evil happen. So, and we can talk more about it afterwards, but yeah.
Now, this is a good place for you to be because just below us, I think, is an area called the Devil's Den. So here you are talking about the problem ruled by the Devil's Den. And your talk is especially the Christian response to the problem. So I'll play devil's advocate as the Sun Devil and say, look, isn't the Christian response just to say the Bible says it, so we should believe it? It says God made us and God tells us what is good. And questions like why does evil exist? The Bible says, well, God just makes us, and we should worship him. And we don't need to really address these other kinds of issues. The Bible is our starting point. Isn't that the Christian response? Because you say you phrase it as the Christian response to problem.
So how would a Christian respond to another Christian saying that?
Or isn't it, in what sense is yours the Christian response? Isn't the Christian response to simply say, the Bible says it, and our Bible is the starting point. Everything else presupposes the Bible.
I see. We could address a couple of points there. I'm not sure that would be an alternative answer to the problem of evil, right? So we can say this is the Christian response, and you might say, well, that sounds kind of presumptuous. Well, perhaps, but I'm willing to be shown that that's wrong. The idea here is that if you held to the Christian worldview from general revelation and special revelation consistently, that this is the view that would come out. That's why we try to get at basic concepts. So someone could offer an alternative and say, this is the Christian response. And I'd be happy to entertain someone if they wanted to argue that there's a better Christian response. But I think they'd have to not only make that case, but they'd have to show that what we've laid out here is somehow, inconsistent or problematic in some way. So we say if this is the Christian understanding of moral evil and natural evil, and why moral evil exists and natural evil exists, then I think we could lay claim to say that is the Christian response. But as far as beginning with the scriptures, I think there's going to be objections that will be raised up against that too, which is, why begin with the scriptures, right? Or why the Christian scriptures, or how do you even understand the Christian scriptures? Aren't there multiple interpretations? And how do we, I was just reading a book this past week about, someone was arguing about, speaking of animal suffering, arguing that could be consistent animal predation, meaning animals devouring other animals, could be consistent with Genesis and God's goodness prior to the fall. And so they were trying to argue that the the biblical worldview, the Christian worldview, isn't clear about that, right? And he even went so far as to say that the scriptures weren't clear about that. And it was kind of ambiguous. And so I think that, I'm thinking as I'm reading this, a couple of objections come to mind. One is that I think that that'd be and this is a person who identifies himself as a Christian. That's kind of I always thought of an odd claim for a Christian to make, that there's something in the scriptures, but it's ambiguous and you can't know it. Because if the scriptures are revelation, and they're given by God for revelation, then wouldn't it follow that by necessity you could, in principle, know it? Now maybe subjectively you don't know it, because maybe you're not thinking through things the way you should, and you're not thinking presuppositionally, but to say that objectively it can't be known, I think would be inconsistent with the idea of scriptures being from God as revelation. So I might press back on that. And then secondly, the person in the book didn't identify general revelation at all. So I wonder how he would respond to the could, would, must, did argument. If God's all good, then he would create a world without natural evil. And so I think there's a number of questions there you could raise. Bruce?
It seems contrary to the point that Dr. Anderson is making there, that this is laid out according to reason, and logic, and understanding, and not primarily from Scripture. I watched a movie the other day called The Privileged Planet, and there was a number of scientists and people from various backgrounds and so forth, and they were talking about the vastness of the universe and so forth. And at first they were thinking that something...
Am I going to have to invoke the 1 minute rule on you? Am I going to have to invoke the 1 minute rule on you?
Oh. Anyway, they come to believe in God as a result of knowing these things, finding out these things.
Yeah. One of the things that we didn't explicitly go through in this an assumption is that that the existence of God is clear, that we can know that, right? Because someone could always try to respond back and say, well, this isn't even a problem because we can't even know anything about God, or God's existence isn't clear. So there's an assumption going into this talk that we can know that God exists, and not his bare existence, but his attributes, namely that he's all good and all powerful. Because if you couldn't know those things, I suppose you could avoid the problem of evil just by saying God's like, Zeus or Odin or something, and he's not necessarily all powerful, or maybe he's like Loki, or he's not all good, right? Although I think he turns good in the second movie or something. I don't know. I didn't see them all. It's too many.
The solution you're talking about, is it one that's been historically spoken about in the history of the church, or anywhere else?
Not that I know of, not this explicitly that I know of. I think there's pieces here and there. Like I was reading a text this week about two Christian philosophers, and they did identify the good as the knowledge of God. And so I was like, oh, yay, good step, and we'll see. But then they ended up adopting some sort of free will solution. So I was like, oh no, what happened, So it seems like there's pieces here and there, but maybe that this is kind of putting them together in a particular way that's, at least to my knowledge, hasn't been widely known or laid out. Unless you know otherwise.
Should it be surprising if an important piece in theology like this wasn't around in the early church or the medieval church or later? Is that surprising, or should we be surprised by that?
I think if humans with no moral evil, then it would be surprising. But with moral evil, we'd say it's really not surprising, right? And that's kind of what the ironic solution is almost even bringing out here, is that the reason we don't see it is in part because of moral evil, right? Because we don't seek, because we don't use reason the way we should, we haven't understood the basic things, and therefore maybe we're content with a certain psychological solution, like maybe the free will defense is psychologically persuasive for a lot of people. But then, is that only because they're not aware of objections that have been raised to that, or they never encounter a savvy atheist who says, well, wait a minute, what about this? Or maybe even another theist who might say, but why does that have to be the understanding of free will? Like, and I gave the example of how I mentioned to students often about, wasn't God free and he can't do evil? And aren't humans going to be free in the future and yet not be able to do evil? And I generally haven't seen those things addressed. And I don't know if that's just because there's a psychological comfort with comes like that. The free will solution might satisfy you psychologically, and so you don't press beyond that. But even that itself is showing our lack of using reason to examine. Like, you can examine your own worldview for meaning and coherence even before someone else asks you about it. And that's the best, is when you've examined and critically examined yourself. That's why I'm never afraid to get up and speak in public about my views, because I've generally done it so much. I think I've heard about every objection. And if I get a new one, that's fine. I'm willing to hear it out. And so the more you critically examine, the more comfortable you feel if you have rational justification for your view. But, in moral evil, right, we said that people don't do that. So we're content with just what psychologically satisfies. So, and I'd love to, I wasn't mean that to sound like I have all the answers or I can't learn from people. It's in fact the exact opposite. I teach, and those of my students can attest that I always say, please, if I'm wrong, show me I'm wrong. Tell me these things. Because I don't think I'm wrong. I think all my beliefs are true. But if I'm wrong, then I want to know it, because I don't want to go living my life in delusional fantasy, and I don't want to teach my kids, and I don't want to stand before God one day and have taught people a bunch of wrong things, right? I can't believe you were given that ironic solution. What a bunch of garbage.
Going back to the beginning, you started out with the idea that the good has to do with reason, has to be according to man, and that man's a rational being, so that what is good has to be fully reasonable. And then you said moral evil is contrary to that reason. But I guess the first thing that occurred to me is that we all know morally evil people who seem to reason their moral evil out. So it seems to me like there has to be something prior to reason, something more of a foundation before you get to reason.
Well, part of that could be, we might be equivocating on what we mean by reason or rationality. People might rationalize what they do. Like, I imagine this shooter in Texas rationalized what he was doing. It's not that people don't give reasons for it, but are those things consistent with their nature as a rational being? Is it according to our nature to murder others, or would that be against our nature? So we're not saying that, in fact, we would affirm that people do what they do because they think, in some sense, that it's good for them, that this is a good thing for them to do. So it might be part of the issue there might be an equivocation on what we mean when we say rationality. That's why I try to specify the use of reason, the laws of thought, identity, excluded middle, non-contradiction. So,
follow up?
Yeah.
Well, the nature of people is basically to look out for themselves. So, for example, if you're looking out for your financial well-being and you don't have enough money, it is reasonable, quote unquote, to go steal some. That's moral evil. So
right.
That's
well,
not contrary to reason, is it? Or
no.
I still equivalent.
Yeah, no. It's a good question. In fact, this comes up in Plato's Republic. I believe he talks about the morally good person, and I think there what we can say is it's according to your nature, and not necessarily just what you think is good for you. So you may think it's good for you to rob a bank, because therefore you'll have more money, and therefore that's what's, you live the life of pleasure and material possessions. But if what actually is good for you is the knowledge of God, then you might think that something is good for you, but in fact it actually harms you. And you could be mistaken about what you seek after because you're mistaken about what you think is good for you. So people act according, people should act according to their nature, but we have to be careful there how we define nature. By nature here, I mean essential human nature, right? Not just what is common to people. Because it's not, and this is a distinction I have to make, especially when I teach at a Christian university and Christian students, is we often in Christian circles use the term sin nature, right? We say it's man's nature just to do sin. I say, well, yes, but when we say sin nature, we don't mean essential nature. It's not a part of the essential nature of man to sin. What I mean by that is that, before you think I'm committing heresy, that we talk about the essential nature of something. We talk about all the attributes that it has that make it what it is and distinguish it from things that aren't it, right? And sinfulness is not a part of that. In other words, you could be a human and not be sinful. And I can give you examples of that. Adam and Eve before the fall. They weren't sinful, yet they were humans. Jesus takes on a human nature, yet not sinful. Humans in the future will say to be without sin, yet will still be human. So it shouldn't be problematic for a Christian at least to think about, oh yeah, I guess you can be a human and not sin. When we say that all humans are sinful, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, what we mean is that there's a quality that all humans now share. It's a universal quality, but it's an accidental quality. I mean, that's not a part of the essential nature of what it means to be a human. It's like saying that all humans have hair. But you could, I mean, if none of us had hair, we'd still be human. We could all shave our heads and we'd still be humans. So sin is like a ubiquitous accidental quality, but not an essential quality. So when we talk about living according to our nature, we're talking about our essential nature, not other things that might be common to us, but aren't actually a part of that. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit. And we can talk more about it too. Let me make sure, Bruce, let me make sure that, let me make sure. Wait, Bruce.
Would it be all right for me to steal from you? In other words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right. Let me make sure see if there's any other questions that come up.
I'm kind of curious about the future state. We were mentioning where humans are without sin. Can you explain what do you mean? Is that the resurrected condition, all humans without sin?
Those who are, we talked about spiritual life and spiritual death. So the historic Christian view is that all persons will be raised from the dead, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting death. And if we understand that as spiritual life and spiritual death, then those who are in spiritual life will live continually seeking the knowledge of God, yet without sin. Sin not staining their beliefs and therefore desires and actions, but those who remain in spiritual death will continue to have sin mastering their beliefs, unbelief guiding their desires and actions. So, and this wouldn't be in a disembodied heavenly state forever and ever, but rather would be after the resurrection on a new earth, continuing to live and grow in the knowledge of God forever.
And so, and also, Greg gave his email. If you'd like to email me, since I coordinate these, if you have any questions or forget the time, you can look me up at ASU's webpage. My name is Owen Anderson, and my email is simply oanderson@asu.edu. And thanks again for coming out tonight, and hope you'll take it out if you have any more questions for Greg. Thanks, Greg.